Hello, hello. Welcome to the stream. Today's stream is going to be a little bit shorter than usual, but it shouldn't be that serious. It's less so researching on new things. It's more researching into the old stuff of what we've been covering through previous streams in the last month. However, I would like to say month. However, that I would like to say more. However, that I would like to say a podcast that's a little bit higher quality than these streams. These streams are supposed to be more so. How do I sort of describe it? Like not really high production, more so like me just trying to. It's really just going behind the curtain as to the research that I'd be doing anyway, and just letting there be a chat for me to speak to while live streaming. And you know what? I've really enjoyed it. It's been great. It's been a great month. People have been talking, which is always a good sign. However, we've also learned a lot, and I hope you've learned something too. But I've definitely learned stuff. Again, I've mentioned it in a previous stream, but I always want these sort of streams not to feel like I'm teaching, because I don't know anything. I am fresh into the topics that we are covering, as maybe you are, and even possibly more likely you're actually probably more well versed with what's being covered in these streams. Now, what has been covered? Well, we started off with, we've been going through the Bible in chronological order, and that has included Genesis. Well, we've only covered Genesis, but in Genesis, we've covered the story of creation. We then moved on to Adam and Eve, Noah's Ark, and then some little stories in between there, like Tower of Babel. That was quite interesting, actually. Or Babel. 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 Don't know. Anyway, Tower of Babel, and then we've started off moving into the story of Abraham. But this stream is going to be just a little bit of just sort of a refresher as to try and understand what has been covered in the last streams, and try to think like see if we've missed anything, and just remind myself, because you know what, it goes in one ear and it comes out the other sometimes. And these are I think Genesis in particular is probably a very important one not to forget, because it sets up the whole rest of the Bible. I mean, I'd say if you had to like focus on two like stories in the Bible, and you could only see those two, obviously the Gospels, the story of Jesus, but I'd say Genesis is probably um I'd say has to claim that the crown for that number two spot. And you know what? Genesis is actually probably my favorite book, other than the Gospels, of course. But Genesis, I'm a Genesis boy myself, and you know what? It's a jolly good one to have as your favorite. It is an interesting one story, and that's in particular, I'd say, is the story of creation. Now, quick refresher as to what's going on. And you know what? So, and you know what we covered? And you know what? Genesis 1. And something that stuck out to me on this, well, from memory, is how there was a correlation between having the science aspects, because in the whole Bible, it's not really like it's not trying to be scientific. However, in this, it's like, I would say, what scientists would constantly debate with well, atheist scientists would constantly debate with Christian theologians. And I think this is where the battle is, and it's in Genesis 1, because this is making quite a big statement, which is this is how the earth and everything, the universe, in fact, came into fruition. And yeah, it explains it quite simply, poetically, but quite simply. It doesn't go into too much detail. It doesn't talk about atoms and all of this, but it does, however, target certain thing, which is the structure. And this is what I found to be the most interesting when we covered this in the Genesis episode, is the structure of what the Judeo-Christian structure of how the universe was created is in fact very similar. In fact, I'd even go so far as to say identical to the modern day scientific view on how structure, how the universe, the creation of the universe is structured. And I'm going to just try and see if I can find here my notes on that. Was it on Notion? I think it might have been on Notion. But yeah, in the meantime, while that loads, because my Wi-Fi seems to be a bit odd. I hope the stream's all right. Seems all right. Seems to be good. But yeah, no, I mean, do you know what? Let's break it down again. Why not? Because I think this is in Genesis, creation, I think, is probably the most important part of the story. And this here, so in the beginning, there was nothing, right? Well, science said that, didn't they? In the beginning, Big Bang, all of this. Well, in the beginning, nothing. Well, yeah, I think that's pretty coherent in what science was saying. And I think that was quite amazing. And then there was a big burst of light. See this word light? Well, yeah, Big Bang. In fact, scientists think if you look a few billion, just a few billion, but many, many billion light years into space, you can actually see what they call the Big Bang. And I think that's really interesting that they measure light as a reference to what, like, how old the universe is. And yet here it says light is the first thing to come. There is light. There is being. Boom. An explosion of matter and energy, it would seem. And this is given very much like matter and energy sort of first. Like it's formless. There's not, things, there's energies rustling about, but it's formless. Things aren't forming together at the minute. It's pretty empty. It's pretty dark. Well, all of which is pretty coherent on what science says. And there's something that else which I thought was amazing about this sort of bold structuring of how the universe was created was this is written, first 5 books of the Bible, which I believe is the Torah, is written by Moses 2,000 or 3,000 years before Jesus even stepped foot on the earth. Now, for someone like that, if they said, like, for instance, like this is all supposed to be given through divine intervention, by the way. We found that out on stream. And the thing is about this is for someone to have the insight to perfectly nail 3,000 years before Jesus, what was that, like 5,000, 6,000 years ago, to perfectly get it right, and for scientists to go, yeah, it sort of is what we're saying here, is pretty astonishing, really, pretty extraordinary. So God made the light day and night, yeah. Then let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters. So then sort of water started working. Well, we know that things, I can't quite remember how we did look up science and what science said, but it was pretty on point. Let me see if that's loaded yet. Nope. Pretty good. There we go. Perfect. But yeah, we also found out this is was quite interesting. Is the days are structured. The way this is described, how the universe is created, is actually described through. Oh, described through Genesis. There we go. Found it. Creation. There we go. Right. It is described as the hang on, before we go into that. We described it, so the story of Genesis is described sorry, the story of creation in Genesis is described through days. On the first day, on the second day, on the third day, and it's 6 days of creation and then the seventh day of rest. Now we were like, well, is this literal? Did God make it in 24 hours? Well, actually, then we discovered Einstein's brilliant theory. Einstein, yeah, the scientists will love me, of the theory of relativity, which states that time in space is completely flexible. It could be a day, a day could be 24 hours, a day could be billions of years. And in fact, there does not have to be the same amount of time for the creation. So we could say, in fact, that, in the beginning was nothing, that was billions of years. And then in only 300,000 years, there was one day who created mankind and all the beasts and all of this and everything happened there. You know what I'm saying? I hope you're following. I hope you're following. Now, then we had a little bit of a war. So this is the war that was going on between God Squad and science nerds. And so here we go. This is what I was talking about. The correlation between the religious belief and the modern day scientific belief, and finding out that actually both the God Squad and the science nerds seem pretty identical. Pretty identical, to be honest. Not a lot of change here. Look, in the beginning there was nothing. Science believes in the beginning there was nothing. Then there was light, science, light. Then there was stars, yeah, stars, and then there was an expanding and creation of space. Well, science also believes there was an exploded producing of galaxies, which pretty much identical. We can argue over the wording, but it is identical. Creation of the earth is next. Creation in the earth in science too. But the important thing is, it doesn't say, oh, in the beginning, earth was formed and then the sun appeared. Actually, it sort of does, but it says the sun appeared. Now, there was life and there was volcanoes, right? And we talked about the sun and the moon appearing in the sky. Well, if there was a volcanic smoke about, then of course, as the smoke clears in the atmosphere, you will be able to see the sun in the sky and you'll be able to see the moon in the sky. I think it was a little bit of a stretch, but didn't there? And then we've also talked about I mean, yeah, well, it does say if we were taking it literal, then yeah, it would mean that the sun literally came after after the Earth. Well, it also said that stars came before um, Earth. And what is the sun? It's a big, well, actually quite small, I believe, star. So, what came next? Sea life. Sea life. Well, we both believe that life, both the theologians, the God Squads, believe that life began in the sea, and so too does the science nerds. And then there was insects, land animals, and there was dinosaurs in the science nerds. Well, it spoke about beasts of the earth, which, again, if we're taking into consideration the relativity, Einstein's relativity, which means although it's next to one another in the text, here. In the texts, it might be next to one another. But it is certainly somewhere here. Although it might be next to one another in a sentence with then the creature insects, then there was you know land animals and beasts. Although it might come into the sentence next to one another, those things could be spaced apart thousands and thousands of years, even millions of years, any amount of time. So whatever science says, I'm for it. Go for it. Start looking. It does mention it. There's no argument in the Bible. Not for me anyway. I mean, we could go into the aging theory that God created the universe with it already aged. The rocks are already billions of years old, etc., etc., etc. It's possible. And you know what? I want to say one thing. Although I really went into this sort of investigation into Genesis creation through trying to understand it from a scientific viewpoint, because I think it's an interesting way of approaching this story. I do think that we can't overlook the more spiritual, supernatural explanations, one of which is the aging theory, because it is perfectly reasonable that if there is a God, that God can do anything, which means he could age the universe through creation in 12, in 7, 6, create the universe in 6 very uh, small days, like 24 hours, or even shorter. Could be in an instant. Boom, boom, boom. But this is how Moses is trying to explain the divine intervention explanation for the universe. Now, then came the humans. So we are in agreements, both the Scott Squad and the science nerds, that humans came after the creatures of the earth. A little bit of argument over Adam and Eve, which was next in the story. And we saw about original sin and the fact that Adam and Eve were both complicit into the downfall of humanity. And we saw about the serpent, which I believe is supposed to be Satan. Certainly acts like him. A little bit of a rascal, that guy. But then, so yeah, Garden of Eden, we like try to find out whereabouts. We're sort of talking here. In fact, very close to where scientists believe the origin of humanity stemmed from, which is a more African, Middle Eastern place, North Africa, West Africa, that sort of area. And again, like we've got to not like overlook the supernatural thing, or maybe if I know that I was approaching this with a scientific viewpoint, but if we look at it, and I'm perfectly happy to look at it from a literal, this is what happened. And I think there is wonder to that too. There is a sort of an amazingness to approaching this story through that lens as well. And I don't want to overlook that. So I don't want to be too scientific, but I don't want to just rule out the fact that, science is there. But I don't think that we should try, and especially this is especially important when we get to things like later on, when we finally reach the topics of like the resurrection, not trying to explain it as why did this happen through science, how did Jesus resurrected, because this is a supernatural thing that happened, and science can't replicate it because it is divine. It's the divinity of Jesus that allowed him to allowed the resurrection to occur. drink break. Cool. Then what happened was we had the fall of the sort of, you know, the eating of the fruit, and it is sort of really ruined, really, really messed up everything. And they had to work. That was new. Had to work for their food and everything. Nothing's giving it. There was pain, there was suffering, because, you know, everything's no longer going to be perfect, because, and the reason for all this, it might like, it sounds quite, you know, unfair. Like you ate one fruit and everything was, you know, turned to rubbish. But it's like it's an inevitable consequence of the action. So it's not like God has, like, I think it's also partly probably, did we not touch upon the fact that it was like for protection as well? Like, it was like, I might be wrong there. Don't come for me. But it was something of like, now you know everything. Your knowledge is like, look, the knowing of good and evil. The knowing of, you become like God, knowing good and evil, because your eyes have been opened. And therefore, as a consequence of that, not punishment, consequence. So it's not like protecting, but it is like a sort of course of events. The consequence of that, you can't live here, because it just won't, you can't function here. This world is not for you. Is not suitable, sort of thing. That's my interpretation anyway. Let me know if I'm wrong. Then came Cain and Abel. And what do we know about Cain and Abel? Well, like any old brothers, they had jealousy, and they also fought, but a little bit too much. Now, Cain kills Abel. We find this out because they give an offering, and God's pleased with the great offering. It's not the fact that it's like, because, all right, so Cain gives some produce, and it's probably a little bit like, not, you know, it's all right, it's good, but it's not the best of the bunch. It's not the best of the harvest. And then Abel gives some of his flock, and he gives the best. Abel gives the best of his flock, the very, very best, because it's for God. And God's pleased with that because he's given the best, but not pleased with Cain's offering, because Cain, you know, is given the not so good, not the best. And so he rewards Abel, but not Cain, and Cain gets jealous and then kills. He goes and kills his brother Abel. Now, the important thing about this is the first time in the Bible that sin has come about, it has been mentioned to come about through birth. Like, these people didn't, like Cain didn't take the apple, yet he was born with the sin. So it's this original sin, this sort of, you're born sinful. And then God's like, oh, what's going on? But he knows what's going on. He wants him to admit it. Like, similar to how we saw in the Garden of Eden, where it's like, why are you hiding? He knows why you're hiding. God knows everything. But he wants the confession from themselves. And, you know, they lie. Look, here we go. He lies. Cain lies. I'm not your brother's keeper. Somewhere here it says that. I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? There we go. See that? I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? So he lies. He does know where he is because he killed him. He's a stone cold murderer. Probably killed him with a stone as well. And then after that, there's a lot in Genesis. I found there's a lot of long heritage family trees that you got to get through. But then comes somewhere after these long lived, and we talked about we spoke about these ages living to like nearly 1,000 years, nearly a whole millennia. And we spoke about why that might be. We used the scientific more scientific view, which would coexist with more modern scientific atheist sort of views. But also, if we're looking at it, the world's slowly getting worse and worse. So this is still perfect time, because I believe in the Garden of Eden, as well as the tree of knowledge, they also had the tree of immortality or something like that, the tree of life. That I think that was it, the tree of life. So I presume that means that they'd live forever. And yet, here they are, no longer living forever, but living a very, very, very long time. But that will soon decrease as time goes along. And after Noah's Ark, things sort of normalize to sort of more we understand things today. Because I don't live to 1,000 years old. So somewhere here came the corruption of mankind. We spoke about the Nephilim. These sort of where like humanity was breeding with these sort of more heavenly creatures things, which create these like race of giants. I think that's quite interesting. And it's the wickedness of mankind. And so everything was going bad. Like it was bad, but it was getting bad. And then enters Noah, and he builds an ark, two twos, and we spoke about in Noah's Ark about there being how like the feasibility of putting two of every creature in the ark, and we found out there was something like 180,000 sheep could fit in the measurements provided in the Bible. And if we looked about compared that to the amount of types of creatures there are, like family trees, so instead of grouping a tiger and a lion together, we put them into one category as cat family. Now from that, it becomes a lot more feasible. We also found out that this is not, it talks about a great flood over the whole world. Well, this is very sort of accurate when it comes to. And then they're going to thing in. But when we talk about the creatures, we found out that the amount of creatures based on fitting 180,000 sheep, which is taken as an average from the smallest to the biggest, could actually function. Be a lot of poop scooping and a lot of feeding. However, it is in fact possible. Then the flood subsides, and then he gets drunk. He builds a vineyard, and Noah gets drunk and is found naked in his tent by his sons, and he gets quite angry when his sons tidy him up, like cover him over. I also like the part that was like they walked backwards so that they didn't look at him. It was like they really didn't want to see their dad in that sort of state of naked drunkenness. And then there was Covenant, and there was this idea of the rainbow is there to like symbolize this story, and I thought that was quite nice. And I did think actually about when I see a rainbow next, like linking that to the story of Noah's Ark. Descendants of Noah. And then comes the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel, it was quite interesting. It's quite a short story. It's literally only this. That's it. But it talks about sort of tries to like about the changing of languages and the being spread across the earth and this tower trying to reach God. But it's not that God was worried about them reaching him. It was more the fact that they were concerned about um he was concerned about their motivation for building it. Behold, it's like, come, let us build a city, a tower whose top will reach into heaven. It's like they're trying to reach heaven on their own um grounding instead of God's grounding. And they want to make a name for ourselves. That was the important bit of this. It was the making a name for them. It's that sort of wanting to the desire to become like God almost, like be as I mean, just the sort of pompousness of this, like thinking that they could build a tower so great that they could reach God. I mean, that's quite egotistical. Then came a lot more family tree, and then came Abraham, who journeys to Egypt. Now, of course, just thinking about it now, Egypt, probably was quite an interesting thing for Moses, who was the prince of Egypt, rescuer of all the Jews in Egypt, the Jewish slaves. And so he listens to, so God speaks to Abraham. He's called Abram at this point, called Abram, later to be called Abraham, but we haven't got to that yet. Spoilers. Did you know the main character in the Bible dies? But don't worry, there's a plot twist. He comes back and then goes again, but says he will be back again. It's an interesting one. Can't wait to get to that. So yeah, there's a famine, and he goes and can't grow anything in the ground. So he moves to Egypt, and it is there that's what happens in Egypt. Oh, he like pimps out his wife and pretends that it's his sister so that he doesn't get killed. However, the pharaoh gives him loads of money, so he came. I think he probably, although it was like saying it was for his safety, I think actually he was using it for money. It might have been for safety, but I think he definitely utilized it. And then, yeah, and then things go wrong when the pharaoh is like trying to date his wife. Adultery. And then he kicks them out, and he's like, "No, go away. Take your wife, who you said was your sister, away from me." And then there's more giants somewhere. There's a lot of giants, and then it talks about Jordan. They moved to the Jordan because they split up. Because there's this guy called Lot, important for a little bit later on, but Lot and Abram are both very, very rich. However, they the town this town ain't big enough for the both of us, so they split off. And Lot's journey is to Jordan, and Abram stays in the sort of vicinity of like Israel's side. And it goes to, and then there's this battle between these like kings, many kings with very, very long names. And they battle it out, and then Sodom and Gomorrah kings go and get stuck in this pit of tar. And then from that, they get mugged. And part of the mugging includes Lot. And they steal Lot and all his things. And then Abram gets told of this when one of the servants escapes and like acts as a messenger. It's like your nephew, because Lot is Abram's nephew, is taken. Please come and rescue him. And so Abram gets all of his workers together and is like, you're gonna be soldiers now, boys, and journeys to Jordan and then chases them for miles and miles and miles to Damascus, which is now in modern day Syria. Now they like, they finally gets him back and he steals all of their things back and more. So he's even richer now, and including Lot. So he manages to get Lot. And then I believe that was where we got to. And then there's a promise, this constant theme of promise, which nicely sets up the real like heart of the Abrahamic story. And that is like the promise that he will have many, 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 many like ancestors. Ancestors? Is that the right word? What's the one that's like many, many children of children of children? That one. But then, so yeah, he talks about the sort of idea of like you have as many stars there are you can see in the sky as how many like descendants, that's the word, descendants you will have, and how many how all the sand on the beach, and that's also how many kids like descendants you'll have. But so there's this promise to Abraham. There's also a lot of building of like altars to God, which like sort of temple like things. Then, and this is what's interesting as well, but I'm gonna sip break. All right, and I'm back. So another thing that's interesting is this: the Abrahamic story. We said was this is important because both the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims are all Abrahamic religions. So this story of Abraham seems to be quite important. And I'm actually going to look something up. Why is the Christian, Jewish, and Muslim faith labeled as Abrahamic? I'm just wondering why it's Abrahamic. I wonder if it's to do with the descendants, because they all trace their spiritual origins and foundational narratives back to the patriarch Abraham. So yeah, it all leads back to Abraham. Now, looking back, God came in with his promise of making all his descendants, not just Christians, Christians, Jewish, Muslims, all of which trace their narratives back to Abram, soon to be Abraham. And that is where we got to. And that is probably where we'll end the stream. But yeah, no, that was good. Like summary, quick flashback as to what's going on. Again, would like to mention that there will be a more. So after we finish Genesis, so after every book, so Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, that's big blocks in the Bible. There will be, in fact, a high like production podcast episode which will properly break down everything that we've learnt in Genesis or in the stories, because and that's going to be a lot more like, how do you say, like a lot more detailed, a lot more exciting to listen to. These streams are great. They're fun. I hope you have fun watching them and chatting in the chat. And I do read you as I go, and I'm enjoying you being in the stream. However, it is also nice to have something that's a little bit nicer put together, because these streams are really me trying to find out what's going on as I'm reading it. And that can be a little bit slow at times because I'm trying to work it out live on stream. I try and make it as quick as possible and as interesting as possible. However, it's, it can only go so far sometimes. But no, I've really enjoyed it, and these are really helping me get a better understanding of the Bible. And I hope learning it with me is helping you to also have a great understanding of the Bible. And this is we're taking it paragraph to paragraph, really trying to look through it and read into it nice and deeply. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you in the next stream, which will, and I promise you this, will be tomorrow. So yeah, and we'll be looking into Abraham, and we'll have a really nice deep dive into that, and we will, I think, try and complete the story. Let's see. How many pages is the story of Abraham? How long is Abraham's? No, that's not what I wanted. How long is Abraham's story? Here we go. See if we can do this all in one episode. We will. It doesn't matter. Oh, 100 years, apparently. If it takes 100 years, then it will be then we will be streaming for 100 years, I guess. But I will promise you that we will finish the story of Abraham tomorrow. It doesn't matter how long it will take, it will be cranked out. But yeah, nice slow stream. We're going to really take it deep and try and understand it. We're not going to rush tomorrow, especially as it's quite a big story. And then after that, it's Joseph. I believe might be a story in between. I don't know. But yeah, thank you very much for watching and joining in the stream. And I will see you when I see you. But yeah, thank you. Bye bye.